It has created more friction than solving problems because it's actually creating exclusivity within an environment of precarity. And whenever that happens, we know that it doesn't end well. What really are we trying to do? So who defines legitimacy? What are the alternative ways we can think about it? That's decoupled from these structures. And ask yourself, how have I been part of the problem? What have I been doing? What am I willing to give up or sacrifice to make this right? And then finally, what's going to take its place? So where to begin with open access publishing? I had a script and then I just got rid of it after all the things that I have heard in the last few days. So I think it's safe for me to say to you from the beginning, I'm the idiot in the room. I know nothing about open access. So whatever I say, forgive me for being the idiot that I am. I'm also going to say, also upfront, whatever I'm going to say, I suppose, is not a criticism of people's intentions, because clearly we have good people with good intentions, but it's going to be a reflection on the impact of some of the choices that are being made on the people who need this type of stuff the most. So don't take anything personally, just take time to hear me out, and we will see what we can discuss. So one of the things that I start to conclude, just listening to people talk about open access and the challenges that we face, is that it looks like we are not really grappling with the problem. I would ask people in this room, when we talk about open access, what's the problem really? Because I think what open access does is it's a band-aid solution to a symptom, to a problem that we haven't actually named yet. And that's why, I mean, I was hearing yesterday people working 20 years to get open access running, and it's still not quite working. This to me sounds ridiculous. How is this possible? So what really is the problem that we are grappling with that we need to address before open access can work? That's the first thing, just from an outsider who knows nothing about anything. And then I would also say, also listening to the conversations, and I understand this is the context where we came to discuss open access, but it sounds like we have decided that whatever the question, the answer is open access. So we are going to do whatever it takes to go towards open access because that is the answer to every question that we have got. And maybe we need to think about it differently, and I will try to reflect on what I see in relation to that. So in the end, I think one of the things that I heard come back and forth throughout the conversations yesterday was the idea of inclusion and equity, and I will ask on whose terms, for what purpose, or what do we consider to be inclusion and equity? So all these things are things that my head is just spinning, I can't process them, so I'm going to leave them with you. Maybe you can do something with them. So my context is that I work as a supply chain researcher. I work in humanitarian supply chains, to be specific, and it's a very, very complex place to work. So if you understand what's happening with conflict now and all the things that we have got, climate related, you name it, these are the things that I look at. And one of the things that I look at when I look in this type of context is ask what is the product. So in this context of open access, it sounds like the product is knowledge. And this knowledge is a public good. It's meant to do some good in the world. It should be easily accessible to anyone who would have the most remote interest in, even if it's Joe who is cleaning the floors somewhere, if they're interested, Joe should be able to access this knowledge. It's not premium access, it's a public good. But we actually use sort of systems that are meant to, well, they are commercial in interest and nature, right? So we use a commercial vehicle to try to deliver the good, which is nothing bad. I see enough of that in the humanitarian sector. So what is it that we're failing here to do to make this public good accessible, right? Then we also talk about resilience in my field. One of the things that we know helps resilience is diversity. So this is why, for me, it's confusing that all the conversation that I've heard so far is on convergence. How can we make things work the same? Because actually, when you think about even what inclusion is, it sounds like we have decided what is the good way to be, and inclusive is trying to get everyone to that good way of being. But when you kill the diversity, you're actually much, much more vulnerable than you otherwise would have been. So when I think about the African continent, no, we don't have a big bag of money, but we're very resourceful people. We're able to do a lot with very limited resources. We're able to go in the dangerous places that researchers are not willing to go. Where angels fear to tread, you will find us there. But because there are issues with legitimacy, whatever knowledge we generate is always lost, right? So right now, people are talking, for example, about, oh, I have a few seconds left. I hope I can do it. So one of the things that we're talking about right now, for example, the biggest priority of the century, we have many of them, but this one is antimicrobial resistance. And we suddenly get billions poured into AMR to try and help solve the problem. I know people who have been doing this research for decades, we've just not seen it, right? And so what is happening now, we are going to send the Western researchers who know how to do proper research, and they're going to stumble into the upstream supply chain where the manufacturing happens. They have no knowledge of the networks, they don't know what happens, and they're going to start from scratch. Well, somebody is already sitting on valuable information that could save us decades worth of effort. And they have context, they understand much, much more than we do. So the legitimacy also becomes a problem that is standing in our own way. If we really understood how much in crisis we are as a people, as the world, I think we will be less casual about how we are thinking about these things. I think we will do what we think is hard work that is not particularly attractive because it needs to be done. It's already been done. But we are having some kind of crisis in terms of our models, which I'm going to get to in a different moment. Then also in my work, we talk a lot about exploitation, modern slavery, forced labor. I want to make sure that my chocolate bar is slave labor free, but I have no problem with my publication that is actually built on slave labor. My colleagues who work in these contexts usually will have on paper, one full-time equivalent, let's say, to teach, but they are teaching 1.5, 2 FTEs. This is what they're having to do. And then next to that, somehow they find private time to do research that no one pays for. It doesn't get compensated. And then they try to publish, and then they run into these types of problems. And then maybe some of the journals have been nice enough to say, we will give you a waiver, so it will get published, but it's not open access. And then they will make money off the back of that person who did this without any compensation. That to me sounds like exploitation, and I am trying to understand how we have come to accept it and normalize it and be casual about it and talk about how we can make profit on the publishing end when it's built off of slave labor, essentially, right? And maybe it's not slave labor because these people really care about what they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting in the ridiculous hours that they do just to get work done. So there's a lot that goes on. And I think in the end, then, if I think about what's the crisis really when we are talking about open access and the issues that are there. So from the context that I just gave you, it looks like we have a crisis in our structures, whether it's the infrastructure that we have built for publishing, whether it's the mental models that we have about how the world works, because that doesn't fit the reality of the context of the Southern women that I work with. And many other Southern scholars who are not women, they could be something else, But every day they do a labor of love, and every day they face this frustration, and every day they have to find workarounds to the systems that we have built. I saw an article this morning. I'm sorry, I'm going to just try to wrap it up. I saw an article this morning where I think it's Taylor and Francis. If there's anyone from Taylor and Francis, please forgive me. It's nothing personal. But they have reached yet another agreement with some key South African universities for open access publishing. And it's being hailed as a great development, but let me tell you what happens in this situation. My colleague, let's say, sitting in Zimbabwe, in a Zimbabwean institution that has not paid for this, is thinking, I have important work that I would like to publish. Now, this university says to my colleague, if you would have a visiting scholar status with us, and every time you publish, you include us in the affiliation, then it's fine. You can publish that way. So my colleague is going to seek affiliation with this university, and they're not getting paid, by the way. They're just trying to get this valuable knowledge out, and then they're going to do it. But then their peers who are sitting in South Africa and probably for whatever reasons are not as productive are going to start having problems with my colleague who's done it. I'm talking from a real life scenario, something that has happened. So after a few publications, they get kicked out without any real explanation, right? So what it has done is actually increase the disparities that we see within these contexts. It has created more friction than solving problems because it's actually creating exclusivity within an environment of precarity. And whenever that happens, we know that it doesn't end well. So we really have to start thinking about what really are we trying to do. And if I will then leave you with something to think about, then I'm going to go. But I think one of the main things for me is that you need to decouple legitimacy from the current structures that we've got of publishing, of doing whatever it is that we are doing, right? Because right now, the legitimacy, because it is tightly linked to who the publisher is, who the agency is, on the ground, actually the legitimate organizations or structures do nothing. the non-legitimate ones do all the legitimate work, but they will never get credit for it because they can't be recognized, right? So SWAN doesn't exist to most people because we don't have the papers to show it, we don't have the partnerships, but we're doing the important work. And we are just one small example out of a sea of many. If you just took the time, a couple of months, go to these contexts, you will find dozens of organizations like this. So who defines legitimacy? What are the alternative ways we can think about it? That's decoupled from these structures because we need them. But right now, this marriage is actually causing a lot of havoc. It's causing more harm than good. So I think when you go home, just ask yourself, yes, we are so passionate about open access. I wouldn't disagree about this merit, but just first of all, ask yourself, what is this really about? What is really the issue that we're trying to grapple with? That manifests as the symptom of what we are trying to solve with open access, the band-aid solution that we have for the systemic issue that we haven't asked ourselves about. And then ask yourself, how have I been part of the problem? What have I been doing, whether knowingly or not, that has contributed to this problem? And then third, if you really want to make a change, then ask yourself, what am I willing to give up or sacrifice to make this right? And then finally, what's going to take its place?